So we have seen from some records of police arbitrations in Cleveland that actually what Mayor Jackson has long complained about, which is that even when the city tries to fire police officers who violate their duties as the city sees it, arbitrators often reinstate them on the grounds that in prior cases that are even worse, those officers have kept their jobs. It's kind of a vicious cycle that was documented by several cases from materials that were turned over to the Northeast Ohio Media Group. Today we're going to talk about that in the context of Cleveland police reforms because of the Justice Department's findings that require a negotiated consent decree. Those negotiations must begin shortly or may already have begun. In that context, we also had this week the mayor apologizing to the family of Tamir Rice for some comments that were made in the lawsuit, the defense of the lawsuit that the family has filed, and the family responding that they want more than that from the city. At any rate, this is the weekly opinion show. I'm Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the opinion content for the Northeast Ohio Media Group, and I direct the editorial board for the Plain Dealer and the Northeast Ohio Media Group, and I'm joined by members of that editorial board, Kevin O'Brien, the deputy editorial page editor and columnist, Sharon Broussard, editorial writer, and editorial writers Chris Evans and Pete Krouse. Welcome.
Chris Krouse.
Chris Krouse.
That's my sister-in-law.
Pete, you've been looking into the arbitration issue. Maybe you can brief us a little bit on where that seems to point.
Well, it's going to be dealt with by the consent decree. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, of all the defenses that Mayor Jackson has made about the Cleveland Police Department, this is one where I think everybody is in agreement, and that is that officers who are disciplined for, in many cases, egregious behavior and removed from the police department are reinstated by arbitrators, as you said previously, oftentimes with the justification that, well, others have done worse and had not been let go. And what that does is it creates this, this cycle of nobody can get released from the police department, and so you got a lot of bad eggs that stay on the job. And Mayor Jackson is saying, why should we be criticized for problems when we've been trying to address these problems, but arbitrators won't let us do it? And it's a legitimate, argument that he's making. Others have commented. I've talked to defense attorneys. They will at least one prominent one, and they agree, that this is a problem. But I think the consent decree is, if they're smart, will look at this and try to resolve it in some way.
Of course, the police unions will object to that because this is subject to collective bargaining, and I believe in another case where there was a consent decree in Seattle, I think, that is now being litigated, whether the consent decree has the ability to obviate negotiated contracts. Do you have a thought about that?
I think that would be a tough sell because there's a third party that wasn't party to the negotiations over the consent decree that has a direct documented interest in the outcome. And I guess it could go either way, but it would be awfully hard, I think, for a court to find that the union had no rights in that case.
I think I understand what the mayor's saying, and he's right with the arbitrations. I mean, that they are trying to hold officers accountable, and it falls apart in these arbitrations. But I also think, no pun intended, that it's a bit of a cop-out. They've known that this has been a problem for a while, and I don't see them coming up with a different strategy. I mean, whether that's in contract negotiations or some other way, they know when it goes to arbitration that generally it does not go their way.
But that is because of past practice, which, as I said in the introduction, it's kind of a vicious cycle because it's very hard to escape from this. And the examples that we published show egregious cases where police officers should not have been retained, were properly fired, and yet because of this past practice problem. And that's not really the city's fault. Clearly, they were trying to, make their case, but the arbitrator, usually on the basis of past practice, said no. I mean, what do you think, Sharon?
No, I think that Chris you're kind of not on the mark there. And that basically, you know, they have to abide by the contract. I don't know when they signed it and why or any of the wherefores, but they are stuck with the contract they have, and the best they could do is go to arbitration. I'm hoping that they learned from all this. I remember during the teacher contract negotiations when the mayor wanted to transform the school system, one of the threats he put on the table was that he was going to reset that contract back to, you know, zip and build it up. And that really got the teachers union focused on, well, how can we come to a better solution than starting from scratch? So, you know, I'm kind of hoping that if he goes into contract negotiations with the cops, you know, maybe he could throw something like that on the table too.
They're still going to have to give, you
That's
know,
right.
affirmatively if that happens, because they've still got past practice on their side, even in a new negotiation on a contract. And if they choose not to give that up as an argument, then that argument's going to be on the table.
Yeah.
But this
The only
past-
thing you can do is get them to agree to start from scratch
All right.
and forget about past practice. That's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah.
But
Possible, but a tough sell.
But does past practice going forward have to be what you go by? I mean,
It's going to be an argument the union can use if it chooses to,
And
no matter what.
right, but what if you put these arbitration hearings under greater light, you know, and advertise them more while they were going on, if that's possible? I don't know to what degree all this is done in private. You know, maybe the arbitrators would feel like they have to, you know, rule more prudently, because we all know that the arbitration process, you know, is a little sketchy at times. I mean, arbitrators want the business to come back, and so maybe they tend to side with one side or the other, whichever one they feel like is the one bringing them to the table. Plus, I think arbitrators, if they tend to go against one side, you know, 2 or 3 times, maybe the next time around they'll go the other direction. They try to even things out. I'm not sure arbitrators do their job the way they should, and maybe that's part of the problem.
Well, you know, it is, I'm certain, you know, and verifiable fact that the city of Cleveland has agreed to arbitration clauses in its police contracts for,
Right.
you know, long time. But, you know, to try to upend the kind of the basic tenets of a contract in negotiations, that's a pretty major thing to try to do, and you have to be really willing to take a strike over that, probably.
But
So maybe that's not, you know, this. I think that the bigger context here is that it's pretty evident that changes to the arbitration process is something the city desperately wants, and if the consent decree can help them get there, this is something that really is clearly, as Pete said, going to be on the table and be something that they're going to be negotiating over. On the other hand, the police union is very anxious to get many of the other things that the Justice Department has been talking about: new technology, more
Better
resources,
training.
better training. So there could be some ways to find middle ground here.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I mean, in an arbitration, I mean, don't both parties have to agree to an arbitrator? I mean, don't
It's,
they?
again, that's subject to how the contract is written, how the arbitrator, but that's typically the case, which is, you know, why Pete mentioned they often try to, you know, as I call
Right.
it, divide the baby.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, at least the cases that we publicized, there was only one case where the arbitrator upheld the city's firing decision. That was of, you know, a dispatcher where there was, you know, a murder, you know, it was a murder.
To a trunk.
And she wanted to go on vacation, so she actually just ignored the call.
Right.
I
She
mean,
said-
that,
Yeah.
Well, no, she told the caller who had called in to say that she
Guy's been attacked.
witnessed a guy getting beat up with a baseball bat and his body thrown in the back of a truck and driven away. And she said, "Well, I'm not sure what we can do, but if the truck comes back, give us a call."
Yeah. Any
that's
other
basically, and she
information?
didn't
Yeah.
write down that the call even came in, because
Yeah.
she was anxious to end her shift. So that's pretty egregious. That's the only case that we at least publicized where they were upheld on the firing. Pretty amazing. And there were some other
one where
incredible-
the police officer, she stabbed her boyfriend, who was considered a sexual predator, in a fight, and then apparently tried to kill herself after that, and she was fired but reinstated.
And she was drunk at the time.
Right, and yeah, I mean, you could say, I mean, the crime, you know, there's the crime itself, or the actions itself, and then there's and even if those don't rise to the level, you got to question just the judgment, the emotional or mental stability
yeah.
of the officer, and whether you want that person on the force or not. And yeah, I mean, there's something. It's crazy that some of these got overturned.
So let's talk then a little bit about the Tamir Rice apology, because there's a case where Tamir Rice was shot by a rookie police officer who maybe even shouldn't have been hired. So maybe, because the city has, trouble on both ends, has trouble firing, has trouble hiring, and vetting people even before they come on the force. But the mayor did apologize, because in the boilerplate language that the city used in responding to the family's lawsuit, they implied that Tamir Rice himself was at fault for what happened to him. The mayor was pretty emotional when he issued his apology, I thought, and I think he came across as pretty emotional when he first talked about this shooting of a 12-year-old boy. I think he really, you clearly see that he has kind of an emotional engagement with this matter. But will that help actually as we talk about reforms in the police force going forward? What do you think, Sharon?
I'm not sure if it'll help. I know you guys kind of poo-pooed it, but I thought that it was good that he apologized. I mean, the legal language is going to be the legal language, and I think in the story we had today, it talked about how they could have put it in some other kind of more legalese where it said the same thing, but it didn't have that impact that it might have had. But no, I thought it was good he apologized, but on the other hand, from the city's point of view, I can understand they have to defend their case and they have to throw in there all the various defenses right now, and that's what they did. But to put a more human face on it, I like that, but on the other hand, I don't think it makes a difference to the Tamir Rice family.
Right, and I think because the mayor, was so just emotional about this and talking about his own grandchildren, that you'd think the law department would be a little more, pay a little more attention to detail, even when they're dealing with the boilerplate stuff, so that someone would have flagged that, as well. Let's put it into even more legalese gobbledygook, so it doesn't sound as mean as it does.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but this also underscores another reason why it's in the city's interest to change how, the training and general effectiveness of the police force and its use of force, which was the primary focus of the Justice Department investigation, because we again also have looked at, the cumulative dollar figures for these successful cases of lawsuits filed against the police, and it's pretty substantial, and this all comes out of the, we're a self-insured city, comes out of the city's, bank account. So, I mean, it's not surprising that the city's going to put forth every affirmative defense it can. Right. On the other hand, maybe the best affirmative defense is to deal with some of the underlying problems that.
Right. But and it's also about empathy, I think, and that error, that inadvertent error, according to the mayor. I mean, again, this lack of empathy, this lack of feeling for the family or how the family's going to react to.
It's a legal case. I mean, you can be nice to a certain extent, but you're also playing to win. That's going to be part of the city's argument, however you word it.
Right, but you can.
I see the PR problem, but I don't really see a legal problem or a procedural problem.
The PR problem is a big problem. It's all about perception.
No, the big problem is going to be taken care of in a courtroom. Perception matters on the political side, but on the legal side, the law is what it is, the actions are what it is, and triers of fact are going to figure out who did what to the best extent that they can, and then come up with something that looks like justice, we hope. But the PR problem is on a separate track. Yeah, it looks bad, it sounded bad. It's also going to be part of the city's case, so you're going to have to get over it.
If the family, if the lawyers representing Tamir Rice's family were smart in doing their job, they would have warned them ahead of time that something like this was coming.
And they might have done
so. They might have done that. But you got to, lost in all this. And believe me, I'm not defending the police department. But part of the problem was a young man who was of pretty good size was waving around a gun that looked like the real thing, and that is going to be part, that has to be factored in, and obviously the
Well-
city is going to factor that in.
Yeah, and part of the
Well,
other problem
there-
is that the cops rolled up
Right.
and, you know.
Well, of course, I'm not defending the police. I think it should not have happened and the police were
Unfortunately, we
wrong.
don't
but-
have
finger
time.
pointing.
We don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of this case, which I think will be litigated quite
Yes,
intensively.
extensively by
And,
wiser legal minds.
Yes,
than
but
ours.
anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in.
It's okay.
We'd like to hear your comments, both on the arbitration issue and all the other issues we raised about the Cleveland Police. This is a critical time for input from the community as the Justice Department begins the consent decree negotiations that we anticipate will start soon if they haven't already started with the city. So thank you. See you later.